stones and glass. I'm going to show you how easy this is going to be using some very simple techniques, so stay tuned. The tools that you will need today are really quite simple. I'm actually using 1-inch squares for my glass. So you're going to have to select your glass that you're going to be using. I've got this really nice pink glass that I'm using for my petals. I've got some dark side. I've also got a lighter side. So on your glass, you have 2 different sides. It doesn't matter which side you use on most glass, but I'm actually going to be using the streaky side. Okay, so that's one of the things I'm going to be using. The other thing are glass nippers. You can't use straight edge nippers that you would usually use on tiles. So I'm actually going to be using glass nippers. They've got a rotary blade. They're really, really sharp and they give good cuts onto your glass. If you use your straight edge nippers, you're probably going to shatter your glass. So they are a cheap pair of rotary nippers. They've also got the single fulcrum that you use. I actually am going to be using the breader nippers. So these breader nippers are fantastic. They're very lightweight on the hands and they're very easy to cut. So in this upcoming tutorial, you will see me actually using these breader nippers. There you go. All right. To cut the 1-inch squares, if you haven't bought them already pre-cut, what we are going to use is a glass scorer. I use the glass scorer only to pre-cut my tiles into the 1-inch squares. That's the only time I use the glass scorer. You are going to be needing a permanent marker. Don't use a water-based marker. It's going to come off as you start playing with and trying to cut it. It'll come off on your hands. Use a permanent marker. The permanent marker will come off later when we actually place this down. So they're the main tools. The other thing you're going to see in this tutorial is I'm actually going to glue these onto some mesh. Now, some of you might not have used mesh before. You're going to go, what is she talking about? These flowers are actually on tulle. The backing is actually tulle. And I do that so I can make a whole heap of flowers and then I can put them onto my projects at a later date, which is really, really cool. So instead of using the normal mosaic mesh, which you can buy online, it's actually fiberglass mosaic mesh. The holes are a little bit big for what I'm going to do. So I'm actually going to be using tulle. This is tulle that you use for underneath dresses. Ballerinas use it. Just really, really cheap nylon tulle is going to do the job. You will also need some clear plastic. If you haven't got clear plastic, just use a baggie, cut it, open it up, and then you can use that. And then you are also going to need some sticky tape. All right, sticky tape. And for my project, I've actually used some clear glue. So Well-Bond glue will do the job if it's for a project inside. The other glue that I am actually using for this project is multi-prep adhesive. So that's the glue that I'm going to be using. It is found here in Australia. If you don't have multi-prep adhesive because you're not in Australia, you can actually use the matte glue. Matte glue is fantastic because it is water-based. So that will work really well. If you don't have that, you can still use a cement-based adhesive or a mastic glue. So there are lots of different glues that you use, but I am going to be using a clear liquid glue for the project we are doing today. So we're ready to get started. Stay tuned and I'll see you at the end.
This is a photo of the tools that we are going to be using and the adhesive. The yellow glass is the glass I am going to be using for the center of the tile, and I've cut the 1-inch square into 4 quarters. I'm now using the permanent marker to do a small circle in one of the quarters. Using the breader nippers, I'm just gently nipping around the edges. And this takes a little bit of practice to do something so small, but just go around it slowly and you'll get it. You just have to be patient. So lots of little nibbles to get around. And this is a very tiny nibble that I was doing. So you can see the pieces that come off are really, really tiny. And you go around twice just to make sure there are little areas that you haven't forgotten. And that looks pretty good. So this is my pink glass. I tried to cut it with my hands and it wouldn't break. So now I get my running pliers out and I'm pressing down on the running pliers, and where the glass has been scored, that's where it breaks. And I've got again the 1-inch squares on the pink tiles. I've cut them into thirds, and here I am making a V-like shape. These are going to be the petals. And as you can see, doing the lines for the third, they're roughly thirds, and then doing the V shape. And now I'm just colouring in the edge of the petals, and that will be the top of the curve of the petals, using the nippers to cut it into 3. And they don't always cut straight. Now I'm cutting out the V's for the petals. And I'm just putting that little curve in so I know that that's the top of the petal. That's a guideline. Now these are really little nipples with the breda nippers, so I'm just curving around there. If you don't curve around these petals, they look very triangular, so this just gives them a really lovely soft edge. Take your time, it's really worth doing this. And you get better with more practice too. I'm cutting more petals, and I actually don't need a guideline to do this. I've made so many petals that I actually didn't use the marker to mark where I was going to cut. The more practice you have, the better you get at doing this. Now I've actually marked the bottom of the petals. That makes it easier when I'm gluing them down, so I know which is the top and which is the bottom. You can tell by looking at it, but it just makes it easier. Now I'm preparing the board that I am going to glue my flowers onto. So I've got my board, now I've got some plastic, and this is a plastic bag that was given to me, and I'm cutting the plastic to size. I've turned it over and now I'm just adhering it down with some sticky tape. I'm using tulle as my mesh. Tulle is what they use in ballerina costumes for tutus, and I'm just flipping that over. Now tulle's not easy to stick down. So the tape that I'm using, it sort of sticks it down, but if you play with it too much, it will come apart. So I flipped it over onto the right side. Now I'm using the Prep multi-use adhesive, and I'm going to put a really big dollop of that on. It's going to also be big enough to take the petals, not just the center of the flower. And I'm using the tweezers because these are so small that I found I needed a little bit of help to pick up these petals. I'm also not squashing them down, I'm just placing them. If I squash them down too hard, the glue will go everywhere. And now I can place the last petal in, and because there's a fair bit of glue, it hasn't dried out yet, and I can take my time just moving those petals around so that the design, it works for me. There you go.
I hope you you enjoyed that video and learnt lots from it. As I said, working on tulle is really, really good because it means that these can go anywhere you like. You can put them aside into a little box and you can use them whenever you want. So I've got a whole heap here ready to go for another project. If you liked what you saw today, could you please hit that like button? Remember to subscribe and ring that bell. I'm Cheryl Hann-Woodlock from Hann-Made Studio saying thanks for watching, guys. Bye.